When people share knowledge, everyone benefits. That was the quote hoisted atop the Linux distro community website. The site was a hub for Linux lovers of all kinds. It didn't matter which distro you used, and this was plain to see. Logos of Gentoo, Linux Mint, Mageia, Fedora, and others could be found here and there. There was even a Mumble server that had a dedicated Bodhi Linux room, a forum with a section for Arch, and IRC where the primordial discussion on all things Linux took place. Just about every type of communication that Linux advocates tend to use, all administered by Welcome, along with others from the community like Preacher, Zeus, and others. Welcome is known by another name these days, mostly just Jerry. Bezenkon, to be exact, of Auckland, New Zealand, if you're more geographically inclined. Jerry decided it was time he gave back to the community he helped start. So back at the Linux distro community, there was an idea for, you guessed it, a new Linux distro. The distro had a solid purpose that it lives up to today, but you don't stay true to a goal without having one. Or three. Jerry started with 3 guiding reasons for creating a distro. To dispel myths about how scary Linux operating systems are, to help create awareness about Linux-based operating systems, and to help promote this community, with this community being the Linux distro community, of course. And the distro itself, well, it was called Linux Lite. It even got its own special corner in the forum where its birth was chronicled, its ISOs beta tested, and initial announcements in all the various Linux distro community spots. But it wasn't released yet. It had another mission, because on the 26th of October 2012, Windows 8 was released and generally available, bringing with it the most beloved of all launchers, the full screen start menu, now dubbed the start screen, because, it took up the whole screen. It had a tablet-ready touch-based interface, and the cheapest upgrade cost to date from a previous Windows version was at $40. It was the first Windows to have native cloud integration well before everybody was excited about work from home or hybrid schedules. And it launched alongside Windows RT, the ARM-based Windows offering, and we know how well that went since Microsoft is absolutely rocking it with ARM chips.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. Either way, this isn't about Windows, it's about context. So we'll skip that nightmare. Suffice it to say, if you were tinkering back in 2012, then you likely heard just how much everybody hated Windows 8. The start menu to start screen paradigm shift came on too strong and served to confuse the masses instead of simplify. But simplification was the entire point of Linux Lite. Jerry wasn't satisfied with Windows, but he also wasn't satisfied with the state of Linux distros and knew they could do better. Much better. So instead of complaining endlessly into the void, he brought that idea to life. So on the same day as Windows 8, Linux Lite 1.0.0, based on Ubuntu 12.04, launched in defiance of Microsoft and Windows 8. So 1.1.0 was codenamed Amethyst, like the precious gem. And the plan from here on out was to give each subsequent major release a similar gem-type name with the first letter increased by 1 alphabetically. At the time, Linux Lite was 32-bit only and came with XFCE 4.8, LibreOffice, VLC, Firefox, Mumble, Thunderbird, GIMP, and LeafPad, among others. It was also noted that XFCE is the only officially supported desktop, even though others can fairly easily be installed. 1.0.2 came 30 days later on November 25th with a huge focus on community feedback, reduced ISO size, and the addition of the iconic keyboard shortcut Ctrl-Alt-T to launch a new terminal. It wasn't really an upgrade process outside of simply reinstalling the OS, so for the latest and greatest, there'd be a little pain. 1.0.4 in 2013, a pre-release community feedback version was issued a couple months later on January 15th as a result of more community feedback and with a focus on games. It was more of a release candidate to gauge the changes made. 1.0.4 itself released on the 1st of February. The changes made in the feedback version stayed, and in addition, the help and support manual could now upgrade itself, but added some time to the upgrade process. In June, 1.0.6 dropped and was more of an under-the-hood release. Apple device support, easy Windows sharing, and a built-in troubleshooter named Lite Fix. This release also marked the opening of the Linux Lite Shop, where you could snag USB install media and stickers, and 64-bit support for those that wanted it. In 2014, a little over 6 months later, in January, 1.0.8 is released as the final release of the 1.x series and also marks the addition of Lite Software Center, dubbed simply Lite Software, quickly after, and the Lite User Manager. On February 26th, new repositories that will contain Linux Lite specific software in anticipation for the 2.0 release is launched. June 2nd, after beta testing since mid-May and based on Ubuntu 14.04, Linux Lite 2.0 Beryl is released. The third 0, which noted bug fixes, was dropped for the simpler major.minor version numbering. Despite the Ubuntu LTS base, software like Wine, GIMP, and LibreOffice will start getting out-of-band updates to keep up with new features, and also offering easy installation of various softwares like Google Chrome, Steam, and Skype. August 5th, Lite Welcome is announced and will be based off the Manjaro welcome screen. On September 15th, Lite Cleaner is released and has some pretty basic features like auto-removing packages, emptying the trash, and generally keeping the system, well, clean. December 1st, Linux Lite 2.2 is ready for download. It, of course, brings Lite Welcome and Lite Cleaner, but also a backup program named Backups, and also File Search. On January 1st, 2015, Lite Fonts is released as a quick way to bring in all of the Microsoft fonts one might be missing. Mid-February, Lite Cleaner is renamed to Lite Tweaks and adds a few more bells and whistles, like cleaning up Firefox and Chrome, the recently used apps in the whisker menu, and resetting the default browser. March 31st, 2.4 is released, now with a new and improved ability to upgrade between minor versions thanks to the new Lite Upgrade utility. And it's decided that there will be 5 minor releases total within each major release. Support for disk encryption, LVM, and exFAT make their debut as well, and the SuperKey now opens the whisker menu by default. September 1st, 2.6 is released with brand new Linux Lite Control Center. It's meant to function as a one-stop shop for all your system control needs as, especially at this time, configuration utilities tend to be spread out. With categories on the left and configurable bits on the right, just about everything you need is within. And for when you make the wrong configuration, System Back, a system restore tool, which can also be found in the Control Center, makes the release. Oh, and there's a dark theme. 2016, January 31st, 2.8 is released, and the biggest change here is the inclusion of a newer kernel. But without a fresh install, you won't get it. Stability over risk. But you can easily upgrade after everything is settled. ButterFS support also makes an appearance. The release was dedicated to the late Ian Murdoch, founder and creator of Debian. On May 31st, 3.0, named Citrine, is released. And it's big. A new login manager, new system theme, Arc. Lite software gets images for easier app identification, and Lite Info, which uploads hardware information to help people looking at Linux Lite decide if it's right for their hardware too. This project is still maintained today at their hardware page. And since this release is based on Ubuntu 16.04, that means, under the hood, System D is now the default init system. The Lite team even provides a systemd manager akin to Windows Services app. And the push for games ends with the removal of the games menu, as it's not as popular as the other bits of the system. October 31st, 3.2 is released with better multi-boot support and a desktop widget named Lite Desktop Widget. Go figure. It gives version, date, system information, and update status with visual cues as to when you should update in red, yellow, and green. Red being the most critical. And some other visual tweaks to the entire desktop for better visibility. 2017, March 31st. 3.4 is released with the addition of a configurable Lite Updates Notify to remind folks to update without being too intrusive. Security is a virtue, after all. Lite Welcome gets a visual update, and Lite Tweaks gains the ability to tweak the logout dialog, adding or removing buttons to your liking. Oh, and window snapping. August 31st, 3.6 is released with a new logo. The now iconic yellow feather is the simplified new standard. It also brings Lite Sources, which allows you to configure which Linux Lite mirror to use based on speed and availability. There's also a new search engine for the help manual, making finding bits much easier. 2018, January 31st, 3.8 is released as the last of the 3.x series and comes with a workaround for playing region-locked DVDs, a font viewer, and visual tweaks for Thunderbird. May 31st, 4.0 Diamond is released based on Ubuntu 18.04, with more visual updates, swapping to Papyrus for the icon theme, one of my favorites.
Mine too.
Time Shift is there for backups, Shotwell for images, and Lite Desktop and Lite Sounds to configure each. And the 32-bit ISOs? They're no more. On to the future with you. This also seems to be the point where Linux Lite has really hit its stride, making fewer breaking changes per release and switching to refinement and maintenance. October 31st, 4.2 is released as a refinement release. Some more wallpapers and the addition of Redshift, a color temperature adjustment software to be easier on the eyes in a dimly lit room. 2019, March 31st. 4.4 is released without any betas. They've just been renamed to release candidates, but serve the same purpose. Another mostly refinement release, but they make the jump from SourceForge to OSDN, that is, the Open Source Development Network. You have to go where the funding is. August 31st, 4.6 is released with a new Lite Dark Theme selector in Lite Welcome and updates to the help manual. 2020, January 14th, 4.8 is released off of the normal schedule. No, it wasn't because development stalled, or rifts between community members, or outright mutiny. It's because Windows 7 support ended on this day. Much like the 1.0.0 release coinciding with the Windows 8 release date, this is another attempt to be a safety net for those folks that held on to Windows 7 despite the cheap upgrade and may still not want to upgrade to 8 or 10. Its original release date would have been February 1, but you can't miss an opportunity like this. Even the wallpaper had the familiar default Windows 7 wallpaper, slightly modified to be welcoming, of course. Besides the Windows-esque branding and tons of how-to type information on how to migrate from Windows to Linux Lite, the release itself was another refinement release, fixing bugs, speeding up software, and steadily holding the line. May 31st, 5.0, codenamed Emerald, is released with UEFI support by default based on Ubuntu 20.04. This has been in the works and requested multiple times since the 3.x series, and while they were very close in 4.8, the team wasn't ready to check the box that made UEFI default. But now it is. Secure Boot is still causing issues for Linux Lite, so that bit is still recommended to be disabled. Firewall D makes an appearance, replacing GUFW, as well as high DPI settings, and tons of additions to the Lite software menu. Of course, the help manual gets huge updates too. and general refinement to the other tools and systems as a whole. October 31st, 5.2 is released as another maintenance and refinement release, dropping old unsupported themes, Flash, and a few other bits and bobs while adding a taskbar restoration function to light tweaks for folks that manage to wiggle things a little too much. 2021, March 31. 5.4 is released with refinement, bug fixes, new wallpapers, and lots more help in the help manual. August 31st, 5.6 is released alongside a new pay what you want download method to further fund development. But the team reminds everyone, Linux Lite will always be free. And as good netizens, we know what to do with this type of request. Fulfill it, of course. This release is another mostly refinement release. 2022, January 31. 5.8 is released as the last in the 5 series and brings with it NeoFetch by default, Mint Stick, a USB creation tool, and tons of bug fixes. May 31st, 6.0, codenamed Fluorite, is released based on Ubuntu 22.04. Besides all the under-the-hood Ubuntu goodness, the forward-facing Adapta theme is dropped in favor of Materia. And for those who need assistance, there's a slew of assistive technologies added, like a screen reader and an on-screen keyboard. But unlike its sibling Linux Mint, Linux Lite took the road less traveled and dropped Firefox, since it's snap-only from upstream Ubuntu, in favor of installing Google Chrome as the default. However, if Firefox is still your jam, there are instructions on how to add it back using a PPA. There's now a Lite Patch application to apply emergency fixes, which results in less weird breakage. Lastly, a new Linux Lite fork of System Monitoring Center that replaces the XFCE Task Manager. This was a pretty big release. October 31st, 6.2 is released as the last release of this history. And wouldn't you know it, it's comprised of mostly UI and bug fixes. And of course, updates to software. And that's where we're left off today